Hello, everyone, and thanks for joining episode 2 of No BS with myself, Bob Stutz. And first of all, I'd like to thank everyone for watching episode 1, leaving comments, and really some personal notes to me and getting back to me on what they thought. And it just gives me a little more comfort that people actually want to hear this stuff. So, anyways, tonight I really wanted to cover 3 topics. And the first 2 topics, the first one is really about the back to work mandates and this whole issue of remote working, going back into the office, and also the second topic is one of, is it really hyper or is it reality around AI and what people are seeing, what they're reading, what they're hearing. And then lastly, a topic that is near and dear to me, which is really about this increasing phenomenon of what's known as imposter syndrome. And I think it's a very interesting topic, and I really wanted to cover it tonight and talk about it. These topics are really they have a profound impact on us, our personal lives, our business lives. They have an impact on how we live today and also on society. And the first one I want to talk about is the back to work mandates. I mean, look, the whole remote work thing has been around for a long time, but it really became widespread because of the COVID pandemic. Companies were at a loss. They didn't know what to do. Government said no one goes to work. So companies really had to figure out what they did. And the reality was, they said everybody works from home. And, companies scrambled. They did good things, getting infrastructure in place to make that happen. But, then COVID started to slowly go away, which I don't think it's gone away. I think people just don't care anymore about it. I think countries stopped reporting numbers. You hardly ever see it in the news anymore, even though people are getting it still left and right, but it's not as critical anymore. I think the reality is now it's become like any other flu, and less people are dying from it. So, all of a sudden companies were faced with the dilemma. And I think, if I look at really why things happened, right? I think companies, originally it was about the health and welfare of employees. Then it became one where I think companies started to think, hey, if people don't come in the office, I can save a ton of money. My electricity costs go down, my phone costs go down, I'm not providing free lunch anymore, and I think companies looked at, hey, this is great. A lot of savings, no travel. This is, going to save the company a lot of money in the long run. And I think it was a knee-jerk reaction in some ways, because I don't think people really did a lot of studies to figure out the long-term ramifications of telling employees they could stay and work from home forever and ever. But that's what happened. Companies put out these big announcements that they're going to let their employees work from home from now and forever. And this is the new way forward, the new way of working. And it was great. But what changed, right? Why all of a sudden did all these companies start reneging on the promises they made, right? Some companies did it outright. Other companies did it in a more subtle way by saying, oh, managers are the ones telling people how much time they have to stay in the office or come into the office. And so, but I really think it became a question of a lot of these companies had long-term leases on buildings. Those buildings sit empty. After too much time, an empty building starts to cost you a lot of money. And I think in a lot of cases, companies decided that they needed to have people come back into the office. Plus, companies wanted to start bringing customers back to their locations, their headquarters. And, it's pretty bad when you're bringing a customer to your headquarters and there's nobody there. So you have to have this presence of, oh, I have people there. I have people that are working in the office, right? And I do think that that is a lot of what happened. And then there was this whole perception of productivity. Did productivity go bad? Was productivity worse now that people were working remotely? And one of the things I'll talk about is my own experience with this, and I think there's a lot of there's a lot of conditions that where groups can actually excel working remote, but then there's conditions where groups fail working remote, and I've actually had both instances, and I'll talk a little bit about that. I do think. I think a lot of it was, and there was an interesting article recently, a statement by the CEO of Airbnb, who, Airbnb is sticking by what they said with remote and everything. But he made a comment about, all these CEOs are dictating their people to come back in the office, but they're not coming back into the office. And that's probably true in a lot of cases. And I think, there's always a double standard here. And I think that's the thing that some people are starting to see, is that there is a little bit of a double standard. Senior executives aren't coming in, they're working more remote. So, but my experience during this whole thing was, it was a shock. I had never worked remote in my life. And when COVID hit, working from home took some adjustment. No more could you sit down in a room, get on a whiteboard and map out a new product or how you're going to fix a product. You had to do it on a Zoom call or a Teams call. And it was a little more difficult. But I will say this, in those 2 years, and I really look at 20 and 21, most of the teams I had executed flawlessly during COVID, working remote. And that really comes down to leadership, because good leaders will go above and beyond to make it work, to make it happen, and really take into account, because we had some serious things that happened during COVID to us. During a major release, all of a sudden, India, which wasn't really affected at the beginning, all of a sudden got hit very hard. And I lost a large portion of a group in India due to COVID. But the great thing was, the leader of that group had a discussion with his other groups, and they picked up the slack for that. And they didn't miss a beat on a release. And I think you can do that when you have good leaders and you have teams that have been together for a long time. Now, I did have teams that didn't, and they did miss quite a few releases, and they missed dates. But a lot of that was due to the fact that they had a lot of new people on the team. If you have a complex product and all of a sudden you have, half your team working remote, and you have no way to really sit side by side with them, help them to get brought up to speed on those products, it becomes very tough at the end of the day. And I think there's, forget all the socialization stuff. All that stuff is important at the end of the day, right? There are things about coming into the office and being able to sit next to people and being able to talk about issues, problems, and it's easier to do when you're all in the building together versus, oh, now I got to, call somebody on the phone or go on Zoom, or, I can't have that personal conversation. Right. And also, I'll tell you, one of the things that affected me was I really felt bad for a lot of people during the COVID crisis who were working from home. You had people that have 2, 3, 4 kids in a small space, trying to home teach their kids, work from home, deal with all this stuff. It was really tough. And I think a lot of people, figured out how to do it, and they did a great job given the circumstances. But my personal feeling is, especially when it comes to product and engineering, I think you almost have to be in the office 3 days a week. I think those 3 days are crucial. There are times when you can sit together, whiteboard together, get things done. Now, other groups, let's talk about salespeople. Salespeople, I don't see a need to bring salespeople, make them come back into an office, right? A lot of them work remotely anyways. A lot of them are on the road. They're with customers. They're in customer calls. Why force them to come back into the office? Maybe one day a week. Okay. There's other groups that don't need to come into an office at all because they're individual contributors. And whether they're at home working or sitting in an office by themselves, no one talking to them, what difference does it make at the end of the day? Right. But I think, there's a lot of hype right now about this back to work mandates, and a lot of it centers around Gen Z. And I think part of that is I think Gen Z in a lot of ways wanted, they love the remote working, right? But now you read these studies that say, well, no, it's not true. Gen Z really wants to come back into the office. And they like the socialization piece. They miss the morning snacks. They miss the lunches. They miss and I have to say, we, in some ways, we spoiled people again, right? I think, if you're coming into an office, there is a socialization aspect of it. But is it the most important thing? No, it's not at the end of the day. I think it's more about that ability to work side by side to get something done, especially if you're in product and engineering. It's really critical sometimes to just have that presence together. But COVID was tough. I mean, I have to say, working from home, it had its good points and its bad points. And a lot of people said, oh, they didn't, they ended up working more. And I have to say, I agree. I think you ended up working longer hours, taking more calls, and being more readily available for people than if you were in the office. And I do think there's some merit to coming back into the office. And I think it's not so black and white like people want it to be. I think there are cases where it makes perfect sense for groups to come back into the office. I still believe no one needs to be in the office 5 days a week. I really, truly believe that. I think you can do it with 3 days a week, and letting people work remote 2 days. I think that's like the perfect balance at the end of the day. Now, I know there's a lot of people who probably don't agree with me. And I've had these discussions with people who say, no, everybody should be back in the office 5 days a week. I don't agree with that. And I think you can still, execute, get stuff done on time and be productive, even if you're working from home. But there is a thing that sometimes being in that office a couple days a week does help at the end of the day. So, that's my sort of my take on all that. And I do think it's an interesting phenomenon. I don't think it's going away. You still see a lot of articles everywhere about it. But I think, at some juncture, people just have to suck it up and say, okay, let's get back to work and try it. But, other companies have done some interesting things, experimenting with the 4-day work week now. And you see that happening more and more. I'm actually a firm believer in the 4-day work week. I think if you really manage your time well, you can get everything you need to get done in 4 days and have a 3-day weekend every week. And I think in this day and age, everybody needs that at the end of the day. All companies should figure out how to get to that 4-day work week. I think it's important for mental health. You look at the stress in this tech industry that people go through, right? It's brutal sometimes, right? And now with this, back to work mandates and, all the layoffs that happened and the added pressure on people to perform, there is a way to make 4 days of work of a 4-day work week work at the end of the day. And I think that's what everybody should be striving for, is getting to that 4-day work week. Let people have that extra day. Having 3 days off is amazing at the end of the day. What it does for you personally is great. Now, I can't complain because I basically have 7 days off a week being retired. But if I was back working full time again, there is no doubt in my mind that I would figure out every way possible to go to a 4-day work week. I sort of tried it in a couple times by having, literally no meeting Fridays, which, sort of gave people a little bit extra time, to be able to relax on the Friday, catch up on stuff without that added pressure of having to be in meetings. But 4-day work week, I really think that's where it's at the end of the day. So the next topic I really wanted to talk about was AI. Hype, reality. What the hell is it at the end of the day, right? All of a sudden, out of the clear blue, it seemed like ChatGPT blew up everything. All of a sudden, every airwave, everything was filled with, AI this, AI that. People are going to lose jobs. You're going to be replaced by a machine. But the reality is, it's not going to happen. The hype, I think, has gotten out of control. When I go out there, and I've spent the last couple of weeks really going through, research, articles, looking at TV shows where they talk about AI, listening to podcasts. And I just think a lot of people just blow it up. Look, AI is not new at the end of the day. Certain pieces of AI have been around a very long time. Language models. If you look at things like fuzzy logic, right? This stuff is not new. It's been around a very long time. I think what's brought the hype is ChatGPT and generative AI, which the ability to generate content is amazing at the end of the day. I mean, I think that is the thing that is, I think the new hype is the ability to generate content. Now, you do have to watch, because sometimes, and I've done a lot of tests, sometimes the content is not actually accurate. Sometimes the content is off a little bit. So you still have to have knowledge. You still have to be able to double check this stuff before you just put it out there. But I do think that there's a lot of value in AI. It's not going to go away at the end of the day. And I think, a lot of times I've said, yeah, well, it's another hype in the tech field, right? And look, we've seen a lot of those hypes come and go, right? Voice assistance, you can even bots, other things. There's been so much hype around this stuff, but then you look and see how much of this stuff has actually been implemented, right? It's not that widespread like you may think, right? But I think now with really what OpenAI is doing, and some of the other companies out there, I think you're going to see more of it. I think, you as an individual have to really understand this stuff, understand the benefits of it, and what the downside of it is at the end of the day. My personal feeling around this is, look, there is some hype, but there's reality there too. I think the problem is people take things too far sometimes. And it's not about the technology, it's about the people, right? So if you become too reliant on AI to do things for you, and you stop doing things like research, reading, look, we're a massive database ourselves, and you have to keep putting that input in there. That is what is so important, is that you've got to keep putting that input into yourself in order to be able to understand AI, understand how to use AI effectively. I think that's one of the key things at the end of the day, is this ability to really be able to understand how to use AI effectively. And over the past few weeks, I've been putting some of these applications through the drills, and I have to say, I'm amazed and I'm disappointed. Especially with content, I'm pretty amazed at the content that it can generate. Now, I'll just give you an example. I recently decided to start an Airbnb business in the Alps with some properties. And, and I was sitting there going, I was struggling with, shit, I don't want to write all these goddamn rules for these properties. This is a pain in the neck. So I went on ChatGPT using ChatGPT 4, which, you have to pay for at the end of the day, but it's well worth the money. And a simple thing is I gave it a set of very simple sort of, guidelines. I need Airbnb rules for high-end properties in the Alps with pools, no smoking, and check-in time is X, checkout time is Y, and that was it. And I have to say, it generated a set of rules that were just unbelievable. Even things around quiet hours, pool usage hours, rules around using the pool, no drinking or glass beverages near the pool, right? I mean, it was pretty amazing at the end of the day to see that, it just saved me a ton of time. And now the amazing thing was, living in the Alps, we're in Europe, you have to deal with a lot of different languages and people. And so my next thing was, give me the same rules in German. It spit them out perfectly. Then give me the same rules in Dutch, and it spit it out perfectly. And I did it with French, and it's amazing the amount of time it saves being able to do that stuff. Right. So content creation, I think, is just an amazing thing, but you still have to know how to ask it the right way. And you can't do that if you're, I was talking to somebody the other day and I said, look, you got to be freaking smart. You've really got to keep up on stuff. This machine can do amazing things, but it's also how you work with the machine, how you ask it. Right. And I think that's a key feature is you've just got to keep researching, reading, understanding. You can't rely on the machine to do that for you at the end of the day. I think that's where people start to get lazy. And in our society, that's what always happens, right? And we find ways to do things easier so we don't have to do it at the end of the day, right? Who wants to go cut the grass anymore? You don't need to do that. You just get a robot and you set it up in your yard and you never have to go cut the grass yourself anymore. AI is no different, right? It's a similar thing. It's going to replace doing tasks that you would normally do. But the difference is here, you still have to keep up. You have to understand, you have to research, you have to read, and you really have to know your stuff. And I do think, I was reading this article recently there was this interview with this woman, Angela Ahrens, who used to be the head of Apple's stores, and she used to be the CEO of Burberry. And what she really talks about in this interview was that creativity is going to set leaders apart. And really what she talks about in that is really about the fact that creative leaders, right, who really can be creative and have those skills, the ability to be compassionate, have empathy, have a lot of those soft skills, but also the ability to be creative, right? Creative leaders will flourish with the use of AI. And I think, the one thing I took away from all that is that, that at the end of the day, that she makes this comment. She says, "You'd better stay curious and be a lifelong learner. The more you read, the more you're inputting into this database, meaning your brain. So your instincts are constantly being empowered. Then you can connect the dots. It's no different than a large language model in AI." And literally what it comes down to is you've got to keep the input coming here as well and not rely on AI to do that at the end of the day. You, as a person, you've got to continue to get, more input, more things, if you're in the tech business, you've got to really be up to date on everything that's happening, right? Looking at futures, understanding. And I think she's right. I think future leaders who use AI the right way, but in some ways, all those other skills that a machine can't do, you know, that's really what's going to set a leader apart. And I do believe that at the end of the day. I think it's amazing as a leader, and I think if I was working today, how different I would actually do things, right? Using AI, but also it gives you more time to really be creative at the end of the day, and you're not bogged down in stuff that you don't need to be bogged down in. But I do think it's pretty interesting. The other topic around AI that I've found pretty fascinating lately was code generation. And code generation has really become a reality with AI. And, is it going to replace software developers? Absolutely not. It's not going to happen. Look, it does a lot of things. Code checking. It can do great things around improving quality of code, reducing the cost of developing code at the end of the day. So there's a lot of cool things around, AI and code generation that I think are going to become daily things for developers to use. It's about tools, right? Tools that help them build better code, tools that help them deliver, faster, quicker, higher quality. Some of the code checking tools, AI based, are pretty amazing at the end of the day. And so I do think all these things are reality, right? But I think we get carried away sometimes when you see TV shows and you see this cool stuff of AI and what's going, and people think, oh, this is the future. I'm going to be replaced by a machine. No, machines are not going to replace you at the end of the day, but you have to be different. You have to think different. You have to act differently. And you can't get lazy and think that the machine is going to do everything for you at the end of the day. You still need to push yourselves. You still need to have massive input to yourself. Look, in some ways we're machines. We have a database up there, and that database has to keep getting data. And the more data you can put in there, the better you're going to be, the smarter you're going to be, the more creative and innovative you can be at the end of the day. So that's my take on all this AI stuff. I have to say, I really like it, but I'm cautious. But I don't believe people are going to lose jobs over this at the end of the day. It creates jobs in different ways for people. So, anyways, I do think, I just saw a comment pop up. It's a productivity enhancer, and Ohad Hecht, who just popped that. I agree. It is. It's all about productivity. It helps your productivity at the end of the day. So I'll take a little break and take some questions right now before I get to the last topic. Any questions out there? Yes, there's a question that says, recently Microsoft announced their Chat GPT based Bing into Windows 11 that it will also allow end user to change Windows settings. Do you think this is the future of software configurations, a chat based system configurator? I think we're getting there. I don't think it is yet, but I think eventually configuration of software will be done in a way that, today it can be pretty tough, right? Given an environment, given all the things that are there. But I actually do believe that in the future, and probably the near future, most system configuration will be done by a machine and not have to be human based. And to be honest, I think it's a good thing because, if you look at clouds today, a lot of the problems, outages that occur, things that happen in the cloud happen because of manual human error that could have been avoided, actually. And so I do think system configuration, the future is really going to be machine driven at the end of the day. Any other questions before I move on to the next one? All right. Well, I think I will move on to my final topic of the evening, which I have to say this one has been pretty tough for me. Um, and that's to talk about imposter syndrome. Because a few months ago, I had a friend come to me and ask me about this. And to be perfectly honest, I really didn't understand it myself. I started doing a bunch of research, and that research I found to be pretty biased in some ways around this. Um, you know, it really, first of all, I'm sure maybe everybody understands what it is. I didn't know what it was, actually, to be quite honest, but it's a psychological phenomenon, where an individual doubts their skills, talents, or accomplishments and has a persistent fear of being exposed as a fraud, even though they're not. And as I started to really research into this, one of the things that came up over and over again that I just couldn't believe, I was reading this stuff on the web, that it was mainly a phenomenon that affected women. That is such bullshit. And I then read some great pieces by people who say it was another way to just label women as not being capable in the workforce. And I have to say, like, this stuff's got to stop. And by the way, this phenomenon does not just affect women, it affects men, it affects everybody. It's not about gender. This is not something that affects gender. And some of the things that people go through, I mean, and in some cases it actually leads people to having some serious things like depression at the end of the day. Some of these symptoms, but I just want to sort of go through some of these things, like what it feels like when you have this, right? You doubt everything you do. You feel that you're not good enough, that you're not, no matter what you do, even if you're achieving the highest success, you still don't think you're good enough. You still think that you're a failure, that somebody's going to think you're a fraud at the end of the day. And this is really, really a true thing. And I will share with you, I make fun of things, right? But there is, a lot of it really does affect high achievers a lot, actually. That is really one of the things that every study I've read says. High achievers get affected with it pretty often. But, a lot of self-criticism, it has an impact on your well-being, right? It makes you do stupid things, bad decisions sometimes, and I, as I started to look at this, and being retired, I have a lot of time to think and look back at my own career and things, and and some of my own behaviors, actually. I don't like to publicly speak, and I tell people it's because I just don't like to do it. It's not the case. The case is I don't publicly speak because I'm scared to death, because I think people will think I don't know what I'm talking about. I've never felt my career was successful. Everybody else thinks I've had this amazing career, but I've never felt that. I've always felt inferior. I've always, and the more I started researching this, the more I realized that this has been something that I've suffered from my entire career. And then you start thinking about, like, how did that happen? Right. I got a high IQ. I'm a smart guy. Why would I feel like that at the end of the day? And then it goes back to when I think when I first entered the tech space, I came out of the military. I didn't have some fancy degree from a big tech school, a big school. I was deployed, taking classes between deployments. I was, it took me freaking almost 10 years to get a bachelor's degree, right? Then my master's, I didn't have a degree. I taught myself tech, right? I didn't have a degree in computer science. And when I entered the space, I found myself among people who were smart people who had graduated, top of their class from Berkeley, MIT, all these Champaign, Illinois, all these great schools, right? And there was a little bit incidents when I first entered the tech space where people said things to me like, yeah, what the hell are you doing here? Yeah, you didn't even get a CS degree, right? And I think what that caused over the years was for me to really doubt my ability to, and even though look, I can execute flawlessly. I have built so many products in my career from the ground up, taking bad products, redoing them, rebuilding them, but something inside of me, just I never felt good about it, right? Which is why I never publicly speak, which is why I always send other people to do it. When I was supposed to give presentation, I always put other people up there to give presentation and not myself, right? Because I didn't think I was smart enough to do it at the end of the day. Even though I knew I was, but I just didn't think it. And the more I started to look into this phenomenon, I realized I've suffered from it for a long time. I joke with people a lot of time. My whole career was luck. Well, the reality is it wasn't luck. It was a lot of hard work. And it was a lot of strategic thinking, doing things, building things. But I always make light of it. All the stuff that I've come up with over the years in the CRM space, I never took credit for any of it. Never put my name on a single patent. Never. And I always wondered, why did I do that? And then I realized I did it because I didn't think I was smart enough. I shouldn't be on that patent. And people may think that's just unbelievable. It's true. It's absolutely true. I've always had this doubt because I didn't come from that background. I spent 22 years in the military before I got into high tech, doing stuff totally unrelated to the tech field. And I think it causes things. And I've now talked to other people who have gone through that, who have suffered through this as well. And it's a tough thing. And then I wondered, like, people always say, well, why do you leave like when you're at the height of greatness in a company? It's because I'm scared. I leave because I used to think that, I need to leave now while I'm on the high end before I really fuck things up. And the reality was that wasn't the case. But I left and went to different companies because I thought, yeah, starting over was better, was easier, right? I didn't want to stick around and screw it up. And it's a horrible thing, and you can look back now and you think about this and you go, how many other people suffer from this at the end of the day? And then, I started talking to people and I realized, like, there's a lot of people that suffer from this. And some people don't deal with it very well. Some people it affects, they end up getting depressed. They end up, tanking their careers. And that didn't happen to me because I kept pushing myself forward more and more and more. And yes, overachievers are key victims of this at the end of the day. And and I think we really need to look at these things, right? And I will say, like, there's been people over the years who, and I hate to say it, because I always like to think people are good, but I have worked with some people that have thrown shit in my face. Oh, you didn't graduate from Stanford with a CS degree. What do you know? I actually had someone say that to me one time. And that stuff weighs on you at the end of the day. And people know, look, I don't back down from anybody. And I never backed down. I always pushed hard. I always fought. But every day, and this is no lie, I went to work thinking every day I was going to get fired. And it ate at me. And I tried not to let it affect my career, but it did. Every day I worried about that. But it did affect my personal life. It had a profound effect on my personal life. And now I can look back and I can realize, like, what had happened. What were these things that were causing this? And I will say, look, we've got to stop hiding about this stuff, right? It's good to get it out, get to talk about it. It's good for people to realize, like, look, you're not the only one with this problem. You know, it's a tough problem at the end of the day, and dealing with it, and now, being retired, that pressure went away from me, you know. But I think back about my career, and could I have done things differently? And look, I never took credit for anything. Never. I always stayed in the back. I always gave credit to other people. And I still believe that's a good thing to do at the end of the day, because it is about a team. But look, sometimes, an individual needs to have some recognition themselves, right? And I stayed away from that. I mean, there's it's only been the last couple of years that I actually even got sort of engaged with analysts and with, because I didn't want to talk to people. I was afraid people would think I didn't know what I was talking about at the end of the day. And I don't know if people can relate what that feels like, but you're sort of locked inside in this sort of dilemma. And it's horrible at the end of the day. It is truly horrible. And I think about, look, I loved Microsoft. And the things that I accomplished at Microsoft were nothing short of a miracle. But I left at the height of it. And it wasn't good, because I left, and then it was put on other people who had worked for me for a long time to carry that work forward. And it's a good thing for them. They had an opportunity, but it was also a bad thing, because I left them at probably a critical time when I should have stayed a couple more years. And I can look at this now and say, man, this was really not right. I should have stayed. I should have stayed longer. But I truly believed that it was easier to leave before I screwed something up. And that's a horrible thing when you look back on it and you think about it. So my ask to everybody is, look, you have to talk to your people, really understand people at the end of the day. Nobody ever came to me and said, hey, like, what's bugging you? Like, why do you not? Nobody, right? I think there were people who suspected that something was wrong. And I have a very close friend who, him and I worked together for a lot of years. And he knew, I think. But I think we've got to talk about these things. Look, mental health in this business is shit. There is a lot of stress in this business. And when I look back over all my years in high tech, how many products I built, how many releases I put out, I just look back and I go, I just can't believe this, right? I really didn't know what the fuck I was doing. But the whole time I was doing it, I didn't believe that. I just, and it's really, I have to say, it eats at you, right? And I'm just thankful that it didn't cause me other problems like severe depression and other things, because I've now read stories and talked to people who have suffered from, this same phenomenon. But then it develops into other things. They get severe depression. They get to the point where they have trouble working, right? And I think, we really need to be open about these things. We need to talk about them. We need to get it out there, because I do think it's critical. And a lot of people suffer from this at the end of the day. So anyways, that was my third topic. And I'm open to take some questions. Well, if there's no questions, that would be great. Any questions out there? Yeah, Ohad, you're right. I am trying to do great on stage, but actually today I have to say, for the first time, I am more comfortable talking, less nervous than I've ever been. And it's really because the realization of understanding what drove me in the past and why I did what I did. And now that I can come to grips with it, it just it's like a huge weight lifted off my shoulders. And I'm able to actually talk better. If you ever listen to the first one, everything was the because I was nervous as all hell. But today I didn't have that because I have come to the realization now that, look, I know now why I did the things I did. And when you have that, it makes a huge difference at the end of the day. So I want to thank you. Well, maybe what are you working on? You mentioned in the last EPS on some new stuff. Yes, well, I have been working on some new stuff, and I have been, looking at, especially with AI, and looking at, the whole field of CRM and what could you do differently, right? If you were starting to build a platform today, how would you do that, right? What would you actually do? And to me, it would be starting with AI first, right? And really, people always say, why, Siebel was very successful for its time. And I still believe today it was the best CRM platform that was ever built. And I know people will argue with that, but I look at this platform and what it could do in the businesses it's drove, especially in the industry sides and, banking, communications. I mean, it could do everything. And the reason for that was the data structure and how that database was actually built. And a lot of that brainstorm was from a guy named Ed Abbo, who was CEO and is still I think he's he's the main guy at C3I. And if I look at C3I and I look at the data that these guys and what they're doing, it's all because of this data structure. And Ed Abbo, he was brilliant with that, and I learned a lot from him around this. And I think now you have to think about that. The data, you have to start with the data first. What are the inputs you want, right? But that data all has to be fed through a machine. Everything in, everything out through the machine, right? And I think you could do some interesting things with CRM that just aren't possible. And a lot of the platforms today, they're not capable of that, right? They're locked into a sort of a fixed way that, you can plug some machine learning here and there, but to get the full benefit, I think you have to start from scratch. You have to rethink this whole field and how things are done. And I do think there's an interesting thing there, except I've realized that I'm not sure I'm up to going back into the space, but I have shared my ideas with other people who I think are more capable. And at 68, I think I'm ready to step back and do something different in my life. Well, good question from Vinay Iyer, who I've known a long time. We've worked together on and off, and and what's the recommendation for how we should deal with the problem? Well, I think one is recognizing that it is a problem. I think a lot of times we try not to recognize it, right? Or as leaders, we don't want to deal with it when people have problems, right? I think that's a big thing sometimes is, we want to deal with work problems for people, but we don't want to deal with the personal problems that people have at the end of the day. But believe me, a true leader has to look at the whole self. You have to deal with the whole person. It's not just about their work stuff. You have to get to know people on a personal level. You have to be able, and people that work for me, they know this, right? That's one of the things I do. You have to get to know people. You have to understand people. You have to really, and I think there's just not enough of that in this day and age. And I think we need to do more. And I think that's the key, educating people on this stuff, right? And educating people that it's okay to talk about it, right? I mean, I can't even imagine if I was working, uh, how people would take it if I talked about this, right? I mean, look, I was at the top of every one of these companies. How do you, if you talk about that stuff, what's the stigma people look at you, right? What are they going to think, right? I think people judge you. I think people look at you differently. They're going to think, you can't handle the pressure. It had nothing to do with handle the pressure, because I handled pressure really well and executed flawlessly. And I do think there's a lot of negative stuff when people start to talk about things like this. Some people just don't even want to listen. They don't want to hear it. But I think people have to talk about it. I think you got to get to know your people better. And I really do think at the end of the day that it is clear that you have to have those discussions with people, right? Educate them on this stuff so they understand that, look, they're not the only ones feeling like this. And I'm sure it's amazing as I started to talk to people, how many people I know actually suffer from the same thing at the end of the day, you know? So, did you ever have a coach or didn't allow yourself time for this? I actually had lots of good mentors over the years, you know. Um, but a lot of times that mentorship was focused on as people know, I'm a pretty emotional, pretty passionate guy when it comes to building software. And a lot of times mentorship was around that, right? How to control my emotions, be passionate, but don't be emotional at the end of the day. And I've had great mentors. I mean, I've had some of the best people in this industry as mentors. And but I think, for me, the stigmatism after having 22 years in the military and then going into high tech and stuff, I, I I think people don't want to tell people like they need to see somebody, talk to somebody, right? I think there's a negative stigmatism there. And for me, I couldn't even think about ever sitting down with somebody and talking about that stuff, right? Just wasn't in my I just couldn't even fathom it, right? Because then you start to think, oh, now people are really going to think that I don't have it, right? And so I do think that's why education about this is really important. And look, there's nothing wrong with talking to a counselor, to a coach, I think it's important at the end of the day. I think people need people to talk to. And uh, you know, look, I've tried to be a good mentor to people over the years. I think I've spent my entire career helping other people do better in their careers, you know. But I think it really does come down to education and talking about it and not being afraid to have those open discussions. So the question is, before you learned about imposter syndrome, did you recognize it in other people? And the answer is no. I honestly have to say I didn't recognize it. I mean, sometimes you see people that are struggling, right? And I always tried to help people that were struggling, give people chance, get them, but to be honest, no, because I didn't understand it. And I think you have to understand it. You have to look for the things. There are signs. There's things that are clearly visible with people who suffer from this. And I think, look, all the people I worked for never had a clue that I was going through this at the end of the day. They never understood. And so I do think this is an interesting thing. And how do you discuss the imposter syndrome in a way that gives you realistic feedback? I think it's tough, right? But I think it's a matter of working through things, right? And understanding, when you talk to somebody about it. I haven't seen anything good on how do you help people through this, right? But I think if I look back on this now, I think it's little things, right? Like really talking to people about, well, why do you feel you can't do this, right? Why do you feel that I mean, if somebody had just asked me during those years, like, so what's the why do you not like to talk to and give presentations or stand up in front of an audience or take credit for stuff that you've done, right? I, but nobody ever did during those years. And I think giving realistic feedback, you have to be careful, right? Because you don't want people to think that you're labeling them or that you're. But I think it's about having honest, frank discussions about the symptoms and how do you help them over those, right? How do you help people to have more confidence, right? How do you help people that think that they can't produce or that they're not as good as other people on the team or I think that's a lot of that is getting to know the people, getting them to open up to you. And then, look, one thing is to always recommend they go see somebody, right? And that's tough, right? Because there is negative stigmatism in this industry about that. And I don't care what anybody says. You know, I think a lot of managers, a lot of leaders look at people differently if they know they're seeing somebody, if they're seeing a counselor or seeing, a psychiatrist or a psychologist, or I do think there's negative stigmatism around that, and I think people look at you differently, and then they treat you differently. So I think you have to be careful how you do it, but I think it's time. I think this is something that can be resolved. This is something that if you can help people early on when they start developing this, it can make a world of difference in their life at the end of the day. And so I wish I had all the answers. I don't have all the answers. And every day I learn more and more. And I think I would just say people should go out there. They should read it. They should listen to it, and really study this stuff and understand these things, right? And look, it is a phenomenon. It's a psychological phenomenon. It's not a mental disease. It's a psychological phenomenon. And when I really take a hard look back, I could actually pinpoint when it started for me. I can go back to incidents that just reaffirm that for me, right? And and that even made my feeling of inferiority even greater. So, anyways, I really want to thank everybody, for listening, for having comments. I will try to go through the comments and answer people as best I can. Most people have my personal email, WhatsApp numbers. Feel free to reach out directly to me. And with that, I want to say thank you to everyone. I appreciate it. And have a great weekend and a great rest of the day. Thank you.